rather than thinking about what you will be in the future. Designing your life or life design empowers you to give yourself permission to think about what you're curious about today. Stop asking yourself what you should be in the future. Instead, ask yourself, what are you curious about today? And then experiment with that. The combination of all of these experiments and activities and connections is going to lead you to your ultimate career path that would be much more fulfilling than if you were to just sort of make a decision about where you will be and then draw a straight line to that. Most of the time, people who use that traditional approach end up miserable in their careers, in fact.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Every so often, I'm bringing back an episode that changed the direction of Work for Humans. These are the episodes that I refer back to all the time in later episodes. This conversation with Farouk Dey is a natural follow-on to the recent episode on life design with Bill Burnett. In talking to Farouk, I learned that the problem of framing employees as inputs to production runs deeper than our experience in the workplace. Because when we frame ourselves as something that companies acquire, we can fall into the trap of using our education entirely to build ourselves into an attractive commodity for companies, rather than first considering what we really want from work. Farouk is now the president of Palo Alto University, but when I recorded this episode, he was the vice provost at Johns Hopkins Imagine Center for Integrative Learning and Life Design, where he led the charge to empower students, teaching them how to design their lives and redefine the purpose of education itself. In this episode, Farouk and I talk about the Imagine Center for Integrative Learning and Life Design, the importance of experiential learning for designing your life, and how companies can implement life design at work to engage employees. We also discuss developing minds over careers, how to construct your passion instead of finding it, changing the outdated career services model of American universities, and how universities can give students the highest possible returns on their investment, as well as many other topics. All right, as always, Work for Humans would not be possible without your support. So please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Dr. Farouk Dey. Farouk Dey, welcome to Work for Humans.
Pleasure to be here, Doug. Thanks for inviting me.
A lot of things came together for this particular conversation to happen, which is that, first of all, I interviewed Bill Burnett about his book that he wrote with Dave Evans, Designing Your Life and Designing Your New Job Life, I think is the name of the second one. And we spoke a lot about the philosophy behind the life design approach. And then we talked about how companies might design themselves to support that approach. We got a little bit into that. Then, you and I were both speaking in Stockholm at the Future Talent Summit. And I heard you speak, and I thought, my goodness, here's somebody who's actually implemented this approach at Johns Hopkins, knows the practicalities of it, and I was super excited to talk to you. And then I re-listened to Bill Burnett's interview, and I realized he spoke about you and the work you've been doing at Johns Hopkins. So it all ties together. For people who haven't heard the episode with Bill Burnett, can you just do a light overview, if possible, of the philosophy of life design?
Yeah, and of course, all life design stories and roads lead back to Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. I met these two wonderfully creative people when I worked at Stanford at the time. I was Dean of Career and Experiential Learning or Education. And I had an opportunity to just sit in their experiment. They were experimenting with this idea of using design thinking, which is used to build products and services on people's lives. And I was really intrigued by that. So in short, this is how it applies to everybody who's listening. Rather than thinking about what you will be in the future, designing your life or life design gives you permission or empowers you to give yourself permission to think about what you're curious about today. So a good way that I do this often with people is I tell them, stop asking yourself what you should be in the future. Instead, ask yourself, what are you curious about today? And it's a much more freeing philosophy, but it's also a much more practical one because rarely do I meet people who are in careers or professions or that they're doing things that they had decided on in their early 20s. Often circumstances, opportunities, networks, different situations lead them in different directions. So that's why I think the more practical choice is to ask yourself first, what am I curious about today? And then experiment with that, build networks around it, and trust that the combination of all of these experiments and activities and connections around curiosity is going to lead you to your ultimate career path that would be much more fulfilling than if you were to just sort of make a decision about where you will be and then draw a straight line to that. Most of the time, people who use that traditional approach end up miserable in their careers, in fact. So that's what really life design is. And I was fascinated by that idea. I thought it just flipped the script, particularly for college students who come in with these plans that they don't really understand. They think they're going to be doctors or lawyers or engineers or start startups or whatever is exciting and hot on TV that day or whatever their parents told them. And I thought that this just flips the script in a way that's much more empowering and realistic and productive. Dave Evans refers to it often as just get curious, try stuff, and talk to people. That's really the magic of life design. And when you compare it to the traditional career planning approach, which is have a career goal and then create stepping stones, and you know how boring all of that is. I much rather use the life design approach.
And you wrote one paper about essentially the history of career services. And that history, it was interesting because what career services were even supposed to do has changed over the last century. So can you track that trajectory a little bit for us?
So essentially, when you track back how colleges helped students land in jobs and in careers, shifted as economic conditions shifted. And typically that happens every 20 to 30 years. You see that there is a major either recession or major paradigm shifts in the economy that create new jobs, that create new industry sectors. And then there are new enrollment challenges in the colleges. And then it creates new opportunities for students. The quick story of this is that when you look back in the early 1900s, the universities were producing a lot of teachers because there was a need for teacher education at the time. So universities used this idea of vocational guidance, basically deciding that these students are going to be teachers and it's creating straight line for them to become teachers. They weren't talking about fulfillment and career happiness, or I mean, this was about being practical. The 1950s and 60s, post World War II, we were in a manufacturing economy. There was a GI Bill that brought lots of veterans back to college campuses. And there was a major need or pressure on the universities to literally place these graduates in jobs. And the economy needed lots of workers. So it created these placement offices in basements of academic buildings. Usually it's one or two people who sort of literally have these contracts with companies and literally place people in. So it wasn't necessarily an application or an interview process. It was you're about to graduate with an engineering degree or an accounting degree, or that company needs one. Boom, you go into that job. That changed dramatically in the 1970s and 80s when the economy shifted to a service-based industry, and there was a much more variety of career options, even though the economy wasn't as strong and that we were in a downturn. But at the time also, I think society was, at least in the United States, what we were witnessing was the rise of this self-help culture. You know, there were a lot of self-help books. People were talking about happiness and fulfillment a lot more. So these placement offices in college campuses started to turn into career counseling offices, and they started to draw people from the mental health professions to work in those offices to help students answer the question, what should I do with my life? That changed in the 1990s and the early 2000s with the dot-com boom and bust, and there was sort of a rise of networks and employment opportunities on college campuses. You started to see universities do a lot more career fairs and networking nights, and it was all about students landing these jobs in these newly created industry sectors. And there was competition for talent. So it shifted from these counseling offices into these networking hubs, if you will. And where we are now is that we're moving more and more towards universities being a lot more accountable for social mobility of their students, particularly students who come from low income or limited income backgrounds, who are first to go to college in their families, underrepresented minorities who traditionally don't do as well when they graduate in terms of landing fulfilling careers with high paying jobs, etc. So now these centers are starting to turn more and more into social mobility hubs for these students. So you start to see how the needs of society, of the population, of the universities to address the issues that students need make a big difference in the makeup of these offices. You know, what started as a placement office in the basement of a building is now the Imagine Center for Integrative Learning and Life Design at Johns Hopkins University, where I'm sitting right now. Major difference in about 70 years.
If you can give listeners a picture of the Imagine Center where you're sitting, I can see it in the background. It's lit up. It's bright. It looks very open. What's there? And what's activity like in that space?
The Imagine Center for Integrative Learning and Life Design opened in the fall of 2022. So just a few months ago. This is brand new, sort of like the latest buzz on campus. And I'd say perhaps in higher education too, when it comes to preparing students for after college life and careers. We took a different approach for the start. What we try to do is not build a career center, but we wanted to build a one-stop shop hub for all of the things that help students truly design their lives. So what you have here are all of the departments that typically help students do the experimentation, the prototyping. So it's experiential learning. For example, undergraduate research is here. The department that connects students with internships is here. Study abroad is here. Experiential learning, student jobs on campus are here. The department that connects also students with mentors and is here. That's alumni mentors. The department that connects students with employers. And then, of course, we have the Life Design Lab, which was formerly known as the Career Center, is also here. So all in all, it's about 7 departments, over 52 employees who work in this newly created building. And the number one feature of it is that there's the full integration of all of these different resources that are typically fragmented on a college campus. And the fragmentation is harmful to students because they have to have the navigational skills to find them. They're not part of the curriculum. You can literally go through your entire 4 years as an undergraduate in college and never set foot in any of these offices and never interact with them and still graduate. But if you have the navigational skills, if you have parents at home who remind you to get engaged with these things, if you are lucky, you might coordinate some activities with these, and participation in these types of programs is transformative in not only the academic sense, but also in the life and the career success of students beyond the university life. So what we did is we said, look, we need to make that a lot more integrated into the student experience, and we need to make it a lot more seamless and also integrate it in just one building. It's a one-stop shop. They have it all here. It's a 3-story building. The top floor is the main attractions floor, as I call it. It's where we teach classes, we do workshops. It's a living room, lounge area for students to hang out. We literally built it as a hangout space, a study space for students. They're not coming here to consume services. And that's also a different philosophy about this, is that we're not building transactional services for students to come and get. We want this space to be a hangout space for them, and we just happen to be around them. And as a result, we've increased engagement of students in our activities from 37% to 73% now in just 4 years. We've increased satisfaction from 34% to 69% in just 4 years. So we're moving metrics in a dramatic way because we put students in the center and we built this building in a way that just makes it easy for them to get access to all of these resources. And they don't have to seek it out. They're just here all the time and we just happen to be around it. The second feature of this building is that none of our team members, none of us, has a private office. It's not a shattering idea for most in industry sector, for example, or nonprofit organizations, et cetera. But in higher ed world, in academia, that's a big deal. People love their private offices and they don't like to give them up. But we gave ours up because we wanted the space to be the students' home. We don't want it to be our home and they come visit us. It's students' home and we just happen to be around them. So we're all laptop and cell phone people. I just grabbed a room here where I'm doing this call with you, this podcast with you. So it's a lot more interactive and engaging. And you'll have to see it and come and do a tour. So it's a 3-story building that has a lot of different spaces for student engagement. We have a content creation lab because we recognize that students, as they're designing their lives, they're not really thinking about careers. They're thinking about how they can become content creators, how they can contribute to this new economy, the knowledge economy. And so we have a lab where they can experiment with podcast building, just what we're doing now, or they film TikToks or do videos or create or write articles. These are some of the new features that are way different from what we had maybe 70 years ago when it was just a placement office, or even 50 years ago when it was just a counseling office. So it's a lot more engaging. As a result of all of this work, 98% of our students participate in experiential learning. So that's internships, that's undergraduate research, that's study abroad. It's all of these things that we believe are essential in the life design methodology. Remember what Dave Evans said, it's get curious. We do plenty of that in this building. Try things out is a big piece of operationalizing life design. So we pulled all of the offices that do the trying things out and then talk to people, connect with people. So we've built those programs that connect students with mentors and with companies and with people so that they can build their networks. That's how we operationalize life design.
So first of all, from what I can see in the video and what you're just telling me, it sounds like a co-work center. It looks just like co-working. It sounds like co-working, which is also a very modern way of doing work. One of the things that Bill and I spoke about in the episode where I spoke with him was the need for companies to become a platform for life design. There's a very stark difference between a university's concern for your success in your career and a company's concern for your success in your career. I don't think I've ever seen the level of investment that you've made at Johns Hopkins in a company around helping people to be that platform to help people experiment with work. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Well, maybe the risk is that, because I've heard that plenty of times, is that employees might design their life so well that they design their lives out of the company or out of the organization and leave. So there is that fear of doing this as an organization and then risking attrition of employees. The reason I know this is because this has worked so well for us as for students that our university leadership has asked if we can build the same thing for our own employees as a university. And we are. So we are going to be probably the first university, potentially the first employer that will have a center for life design for its employees. You heard it here first. It's not a public announcement. We're in the process of building this, but at some point within the next year or so, we will start announcing this. But I've been working diligently with our human resources to help them build this. And I will tell you that this was an initial concern. The reason we want to do it is because university employees have been observing the success of this for students and are saying, could we have that too? And all the credit goes to our university president, Ron Daniels, who is visionary and entrepreneurial beyond any university president I've seen who is leaning into it and saying, well, let's do it. Let's figure out how to make this happen. But of course, the conversation led us to, well, what if we do such a good job at this that people will become so curious and so inspired and they start to try things out. And then it leads them to leave the institution and go somewhere else. I think that's a risk worth taking, personally. I think that would be a good feather in our hat. I'd rather have people leave and be grateful that Hopkins was the institution that helped them get there because we invested in them. And the truth is that they might not leave too. They might be so fulfilled with what we've been able to do for them that they might find opportunities within the university to grow and develop their future. But I'd rather see that than have somebody stay longer and potentially be miserable.
What if you could increase the proportion of people who are happy at your institution by a considerable degree? What would that do? It could potentially be magical. How did you pitch this idea to Johns Hopkins? And how is it that Johns Hopkins was in a place that they could hear it? What is the context from which Johns Hopkins is seeing this that they said, that's what we want?
Yeah, I was at Stanford at the time and I'd been working with Bill Burnett and Dave Evans and helping them out and building my own organization, really just trying to catch up to everything that they have developed. And we wanted to link up with them as much as we could. But my dream really was to take what they had built and institutionalize it. I'm not sure that I could necessarily see that the path to really do that at Stanford at the time. I mean, there were plenty of good efforts happening, but to institutionalize it the way that I was thinking, it required a big sale job and maybe just some time. Hopkins was at a moment of crisis. And I think that's often what you will see with big transformations, particularly in higher education, is because universities are creatures of tradition and it's really hard to make big moves and take sort of like big bites at things and take risks like the one we took with bringing life design to Johns Hopkins and creating this new division of integrative learning and life design. I mean, there was just a lot of new things that we were just trying out that normally universities would not just want to do if they're not experiencing big challenges. Johns Hopkins was experiencing a big challenge at the time. It was a moment of crisis. We had sort of an outdated career services model, and there were enough concerns on the ground from students, alumni, and all the way to trustees. So that's the short of the story. And I happened to be ready with a potential solution. So when I got the recruitment call, and we started to have conversations, I shared that. I said, I think that you might be trying to solve the problem the wrong way, if I may. Not necessarily something that I would do as a candidate in any other time, but that was a time where it was appropriate because I felt really confident about the work that we were doing at Stanford. So I made that proposal at the time. I said, like, if you really want to turn things around, I think that this is what we could do. And I want to just really give the credit to the university leadership, to President Ron Daniels and Provost Sunil Kumar, who at the time, the two of them just took a chance. They didn't have to take the chance, but they took it. And they said, we'll try this out and see what happens. Almost word for word, life design language, right? Try things out and see what happens. They supported the new vision and the new direction. Of course, what comes with that is a lot of pressure for me to deliver after that. It was myself and my team and building the right organization and hiring the right people and putting the right pieces in place. It took some time to start to turn things around, but we all knew that we were headed in the right direction after probably 1 year when we started to see the metrics shift. You could feel it even in the air this is without a building. The building came 5 years later. That's why I always advise universities that want to make this change. I say, like, don't start with infrastructure or with budgets. If you have a consultant who comes in and says you need to invest all this money in and you have to build out this building and infrastructure, that's the wrong direction. What we did was really put the model in place. we could be just as successful without this building and without some of the funding that we're raising now. So we didn't ask for a huge infusion of funding. We just wanted to reallocate resources in a way that allows for this philosophy to work. And the thing is, it made sense to them and to everybody who I spoke with, including parents. I'd share with you, Dart, that there were some nerves on the ground here about like how would parents of students receive the life design message when they're paying all this money to a private school and potentially expecting a return on investment in the form of jobs and salaries. How could someone like me come on stage and say, we actually just want students to get curious, try things out, connect with people, and just trust that things will work out? That's, a big leap, and one that anyone would be appropriately nervous about. But I think what we discovered is that parents connected really well with this message because they saw themselves in their stories in that message. I mean, it resonated because they made a lot of sense to them, and that allowed for the model to truly live on and for our organization to thrive. So there were just a lot of things that came in place at the same time that made the pitch possible. I probably wouldn't be able to pitch this idea and what we've done any other time in my career, even with the proven success here at Johns Hopkins. It's so against tradition that it really requires an entrepreneurial university leadership, entrepreneurial board of trustees, enough crisis on the ground to make people want to change. So the enemy of all of this transformation would be complacency. And I think what worked for us is that we were in a place where we could not afford to be complacent anymore. We were in a bad spot as a premier university that represented excellence in everything that we did. And this was an area where we did not excel. So we were under the spotlight and there was a lot of pressure. And that's what made it possible to try something a little bit more innovative. And it allowed us to color outside the lines.
Can you say something about the mindset that students come in with and how it changes? One of the things Bill and I talked a lot about was what a design mindset is like. And you've spoken a little bit about curiosity and you've spoken a little bit about what the right mindset is. But what do students come in with that they move away from through this process?
It is typical for a lot of college students, especially college students who are on the high achieving end of the scale, who have done all of the right things and more in high school and throughout their education and have the pressure to make it to the top. Often we see them come to our campus, for example, with, I'd call it maybe faulty ideas or misconceptions about how to build a successful career, what they should do in their future, what careers are the path towards success and which ones are not. And they get those messages from their friends and their peers, the media, and a lot of times from their own families. So we have to do a little bit of correcting, busting some of those myths a little bit and help them give themselves permission to dream again, to imagine, literally, to imagine possibilities, to try things out, to take some risks. There's no better time in one's lifetime than when they're in college and they're surrounded by all these resources to help experiment with all of that curiosity. If there's a time in our lives to be curious, this is it, on a college campus. And we wanted students to really understand their place in this ecosystem, that they're here not only as a learner or somebody who has to go through stepping stones to get a college degree, but you're surrounded by all of these opportunities to experiment with curiosity, to connect with people, to build networks. The life design approach works best on a college campus, works great anywhere else, but on a college campus, you have so much opportunity to do that. So for them to start to think about it from that perspective, rather than choosing a major fairly quickly, which is there's one element in higher education I could change. It would be that, have students choose missions and vision statements rather than academic major, but that is the system we have. They have to map out, to chart out their education over 4 years. There's the concept of failure and success is something that we have to work with them and to rethink. So now in our orientation for freshmen, we have added this session called Failure is Fine. And it's a panel that I usually moderate and as our president, and we bring either faculty or alumni or a mix of others to talk about how they failed, to normalize failure, to say that this is part of the process. At some point you're gonna fail an exam or a class, or have to withdraw, or just lose a game if you're an athlete, or have to take a step back. There will be speed bumps, and there will be bigger bumps, and there will be moments where it feels like the world is closing in on you. And it's important for students to develop those coping skills and to have perspective about that. That these moments, as hard as they are, they're great opportunities for clarifying values and goals and mission. And they're great reset moments that could make a big difference in their lives.
It does strike me that particularly the kind of student that ends up at Johns Hopkins has spent a lot of time thinking about how they look to those around them. How am I going to look to somebody doing admissions? How am I going to look to this particular professor? What am I making myself into as a product that others are going to perceive? And one of the most fundamental things, one of the most fundamental transformations is, what is the experience I want to have in my life? And starting to look inward to that and understand what that is by testing. Hi, everyone. Here are some gift ideas inspired by guests on Work for Humans. For the people in your life who like a challenge, try the exquisite puzzles of Stumpcraft's Jason Robillard, who told us all about the essentials of great puzzle design. For something seasonal, you might like Mistletoe Market, but my favorite is called Queen Bee. If someone you know is taking work way too seriously, help them to lighten up with Griebroff's shiny new book, Today Was Fun. If you have a friend who's at sea in the pace of change, I recommend Embracing Uncertainty. It's the latest book from Margaret Heffernan, in which she tells us the techniques that writers, musicians, and artists use to thrive in an unpredictable world. And the one that I'm definitely going to put in my own stocking this year, Joe Pine's new book, The Transformation Economy, is now available for pre-order.
Precisely, and I wish I could say something different, Dart, but the truth is that feeling of being evaluated constantly doesn't go away in college, particularly at a school like Johns Hopkins. They're still having to perform and in classes and do well in exams, and they feel like they're being evaluated by their teachers and faculty and academic advisors. By the way, their peers, and it goes all the way to the potential employers that hire them for internships or ultimately for jobs, or those who are interested in pursuing more education towards professional schools or graduate schools. They're thinking about that too, is continuing to build their portfolio and their CV or resume. It does not go away, but I think where there is an opportunity is for them to develop more of that second sense that you mentioned, of constantly for them to evaluate their experience here and to leverage it in the appropriate way and to enjoy it at the same time. There is plenty on any college campus, frankly, for them to leverage that experience. I'll just mention a few. Athletics is a really good way for students to fully immerse themselves in the college experience and make it enjoyable too, not just evaluated all the time, but that they feel like they can just let their hair down and just be, and allow the networks to develop organically without them having to be strategic about them, that they're building these skills organically without even noticing. The best skills I know I develop are the ones that I realized afterwards, sometimes months or years afterwards, that I built that skill, but I didn't go into it with that idea of developing that. So it's great when you have these little punchlines that come afterwards without you realizing that that was the goal the entire time. co-curricular activities, getting involved in student organizations and leadership, being engaged in the arts, just even life in the residence halls is an amazing co-curricular experience that helps students be in the experience. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and. The constant evaluation doesn't go away, but I think if students develop a coping mechanism and a way to just coexist with that and accept it and understand that that's just part of being a learner and eventually a professional. And when they launch into their careers, they're going to they're going to have to worry about how they look to their boss, to their colleagues, even if they're an entrepreneur, how they look to their customers. And everybody's going to have to develop that mindset of managing one's brand to the outside world. But to put that in perspective and also have a really good sense of self and clarifying values and what we're about and being fully present in the experience is truly possible to develop on a college campus.
One of my guests, Shalini Verma, who came on the show, she was MIT, Harvard trained, engineering, director of program managers at Google. She spent the early part of her life performing, essentially, becoming what she thought she had to become to be valued in the eyes of her parents, for instance, who she felt were judging. Then she realized through self-exploration that really that was something that was holding her back. And she started to build out a philosophy that's made her incredibly successful as a manager and as a leader, of being really introspective and developing herself. It's a fantastic episode. It's one of the most popular episodes that we've done. And it started off with her being completely unknown and then speaking about this. And it was super valuable. I'm wondering if this is having any effect on the experience of your faculty. And the reason I bring that up is that I've asked a lot of people this question that you and I spoke about a little bit before the show, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you? And one of the things I've heard from faculty occasionally is that they would love to have students who have a passion for the subject, as opposed to having students who are careerists and were just using it as a stepping stone to get to money or whatever thing that they're trying to get to. And so I described that to them. I said, well, that's sort of a supply chain problem for your job, which is that the institution that you're working for is not delivering the kind of students to you that would make your experience great here as a member of faculty. And so has there been any noticeable difference with your faculty in terms of how students arrive to them?
Well, there has been a difference not only in that, but also in how faculty engage with an organization like ours. I've been in this business for over 2 decades, and what I could tell you is that we tend to sit sort of on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and sometimes our fields can be confrontational. And the reason for that is precisely what you said, is that faculty or academics usually frown upon the concept of higher education or university being a vocational training ground for students for jobs, because faculty and academics go into this field with the passion to develop minds and world citizenship. And they're really thinking far beyond a job. And they see that, I'll just say, career centers and universities as offices that often cheapen the value of higher education to a first job and a first salary out of school. So the language of life design as a substitute to career development and career planning has opened a lot of doors for us for not only partnership, but mutual understanding. They love it because we are speaking the same language. Because, to a certain point, I agree with them. We don't want to cheapen the value of higher education, these 4 years of experiential learning and experimentation and developing networks and building friendships and learning all of these skills and acquiring all this knowledge from these world-renowned faculty, and being surrounded by all these books and all of this knowledge on campus, to only link that to a first job after a degree. However, I think we also all understand that the cost of higher education in the United States makes it really hard to ignore the first job after graduation. So it's easy to say we're going to develop minds, but it costs a lot of money to develop minds for these families, and of course they want their return on investment. So the solution of using this label of life design, and moving away from the word career, which has been part of my work in this space for a long time. When I was at Stanford, I really worked hard with a team there to move from career to the concept of meaningful work. We even called the office Beam just to stay away from that. And here at Hopkins, we really went into this life design option. We threw away the concepts of career development, career coaching, all of these things, transactional services. We call the center Imagine. We're doing all of this important work, and we use different language. And it's not only inviting students into the conversation much more easily, because what we realize is that the word career is also intimidating to students. So faculty frown upon it, students are scared of it, parents want it. We threw that out. We use life design. We don't use career at all. We're integrating all of these different offices that weren't connected to career into this organization, and faculty are into it. And it gives them also language that they use in their own classes, in their own syllabi, working with students. It's stuff that they get, that it resonates for them, and it aligns with their philosophy of what higher education should be about.
That's fantastic. And I can see how rolling this out to faculty as a program is going to increase their fluency and understanding of what the students are going through, which it's a beautiful pairing. Do you see that this might ever influence admissions and the kinds of people who you think might be able to get the most benefit out of your institution?
Yes, I do. And as a piece of a much larger puzzle, there are so many things that influence enrollment and admissions, but the return on investment is a big one now. As I said earlier, the college education in the United States is very expensive. Of course, families are having the appropriate conversations about the value proposition of higher education. And it comes in many forms, but employability and that first job after college, and is very much part of the conversation. What life design does is that it goes beyond that. What we're saying is yes, and the outcome 5 years later is even more important. And the outcome for your student 10 years later is much more important. And when we start to talk about 5 years outcomes, 10 years outcomes, 20 years outcomes, we start to talk a lot more about fulfillment rather than having a job. So parents, what they want in the first year after their students graduate is that they want them out of their basements, and they want them to have some type of salary, and they want to launch. So it's fairly basic. But life design gives them the hope that these students are going to be fulfilled and happy and thriving in their careers. A career development approach doesn't do that. Life design does. So in that sense, I think it's a big selling point. It's a huge value proposition to rethink the value of the entire university. When we talk about only jobs, the university sells the value proposition to prospective students and their families as an early outcome. You graduate 6 months later, you will have this job and that's the pressure that's on them. When you're using life design, the university is selling the value proposition of the entire university, not just an office that's going to place their students in jobs. It's saying that we are adopting the value of life design as a university, and every member of our community is participating in this. That means it's the faculty member who your students will work with, it's their coach if they're an athlete, it's their friends, it's their RA, it's their academic advisor. It's the entire community we're using this type of language. So what I'm seeing this now potentially making a big difference is in the liberal arts college space. I had the honor to speak at a conference recently for college presidents of small liberal arts schools. And as you know, they are the ones who are experiencing the biggest challenges in enrollment these days. And they were also intrigued by this idea of life design rather than employability, just reframing the college education with this kind of mindset. I'm getting lots of calls from these college presidents to connect and consult with them. I'm visiting one actually next week to help them rethink not just the design of one office, but the full story and the narrative of their university using this powerful language that would make the return on investment much more compelling for students.
That's very interesting. I'm thinking about my college career, which is I went to college when college was cheap. It was $350 a quarter. And I got to study everything. I was there for 7 years because it was basically free. All I had to do was wash dishes on the weekends and I could pay for it. And I got to just, try everything. I was a philosophy major. I was a biology major. I was a economics major. I got 3 classes away from graduating in economics before I said, nope, I think I'm going to be a writer. And so I went on to actually study literature and creative writing. That's what I graduated in. And that is, talk about a privilege. What an incredible privilege that is. I imagine a situation in which companies could enable that kind of breadth of flexibility. What would your advice be to a company who is saying, you know what, we're going to build a life design center? What would you say to them would be your advice? And some of it might be from lessons learned of your own, and some of it might be, for the unique situation that they might be in.
I think my advice would be the same to the one that I give to universities is don't build the center first, but build the model first. I mean, I understand what you're trying to accomplish, of course, but build the model first. So be really clear about philosophy, and then make prototype with a set of programs or services, maybe hire a couple of people who will experiment with those ideas, and start to build programs surrounded by a powerful narrative and let it grow. I think the worst outcome from just starting with a center first is that you're going to have a center that's empty, and then that is a beautiful building without a lot of people in it. For us here at the Imagine Center year round, other than summer, the center is packed with students all the time because it's been a building process for 5 years. We've been building this model and making it part of the university culture. So a company that wants to use life design as an approach to engage employees should start with that. Just how do you make your employees really engaged, and use the philosophy of life design as an approach to educate and engage them and inspire them. Maybe build a small program or a department and then grow it over time. I think once you reach a certain level of capacity, there is a tremendous opportunity to give that model a home and put brick and mortar around it. And brick and mortar is really important. Like I said, we could do what we're doing without a building, but once we open the building, it has legitimized the work that we're doing. It has given it a brand. It has elevated it. It also is given it to headquarters. We have this beacon right outside of the building that has the word imagine in there. So it's a symbol. It's very symbolic, and it's a home. But it would have meant nothing if we built that the first year.
You may know this, but Christopher Alexander, who was the architect who really, I think, kicked off Agile design at Berkeley, he wrote a book called The Oregon Experiment, and it was about how universities should develop a 20-year plan. And basically, he said 20-year plans are a bad idea. He says, basically, you put down a 20-year plan for what your architectural infrastructure is going to look like. That's totally wrong. You're going to be building for what people don't need. And what he said was, you should build incrementally. People should move into the space that you build, and then they should say, you know what, this space needs to be modified in this way because our needs are evolving, and that the architecture should be incremental, and that the architectural design should rise up to meet the need. And so one of the things he held up as one of the best examples of design was Oxford University. So I just went to visit Oxford University. Since I saw you in Stockholm, I traveled over to Oxford because I just wanted to see what he was talking about. I couldn't see it at all, I'll tell you, by looking at it, because I don't think you can see it from the outside. I mean, maybe that's why I couldn't see it, which is that what makes Oxford work, or any kind of thing like that work, is what it feels like when you're inside it, not when you're looking at it from the outside.
Precisely. So, I mean, you have to have the full experience. The outside gives you a part of the story, and then experiencing it from the inside, and then experiencing the actual model and interactions make a big difference.
And then building, as it proves its success, building the infrastructure to support it in the shape that it's developed into. It makes a ton of sense. It's very, very aligned with the whole agile design methodology and design thinking. It's very, very great. So, is there anything I haven't asked you that I should ask you? Like, what would you love to tell everybody that I have that's an answer that I haven't elicited?
Sometimes people ask me so you got Hopkins this far, where do you all go in next? So maybe we'll go there. So the question is, what's next? We're in the middle of thinking about that. It's been 5 years. We've turned a lot of our metrics around. As I shared earlier, we moved satisfaction from 37% to 69%. We moved engagement from 37% to now 73%. We've closed all of the gaps between, we call the haves and the have-nots, in the 6 months post-graduation outcomes. We're really concerned about those, particularly for first-generation students and for low and limited income students. So we've done really well there. Experiential learning is at 98% of our students. Our mentoring programs are engaging. Today, 12,000 students with 6,000 alumni. We started 5 years ago with practically zero. We had no network. So, I mean, we can back up our success with a ton of metrics that are really meaningful. And these metrics match the vibe on campus. This is sort of anecdotally what people are talking about, is that they feel good and it feels right to be in this kind of life design experience on campus. We still have more to do, so 70% satisfaction is still not satisfaction. To me, it just looks good when you start from so low. We want to get it up to 80 and 90, of course, and be in the 90s. Same thing with engagement, but we've come so far. I will tell you that we're really watching the paradigm shifts that are happening now in the workforce with the introduction of artificial intelligence, the acceleration of automation, the changes that are happening today and will continue to happen in the workplace and in jobs. I'm constantly studying the World Economic Forum reports and other reports to see the shifts in skills that are needed. So on one hand, we care a lot about how students design their lives conceptually, but also at the same time, part of that is to equip them with the right skills that are appropriate for the future careers and jobs that do not exist today. I think the recent World Economic Forum listed that 85 million jobs will be lost by 2025, but we'll gain 97 million jobs. And that's just 2 years from now. So, and COVID-19 has accelerated these trends tremendously. Universities are not positioned today to give these future workers the skills of the future. Their students are getting tremendous academic training, but actual work skills that are necessary for their success, for whether they're soft skills or some of the technical skills, I think we're not catching up to the workforce needs. So what we're looking at is developing a university-wide catalog of work skill development courses, and we're already in that process now, but we want to just really formalize it. That, I think, is the space we want to play in the next few years, is build this work skills pillar that would be added to the education of students, so that not only they're getting curious, they're experimenting, they're connecting with people, they're also developing strong skills that are necessary for the future.
There's a real challenge with the whole skills discussion, which is that the practical skills, the simple skills that can be learned fairly quickly, right? I can learn them in a just-in-time way. And then there's a range of capabilities that students might have which can't be taught. This is what I learned as a writer. There was one person giving advice who said, writing can't be taught, but it can be learned. He said, so the central challenge of a writing professor, which I was, is to put students into a position where they can learn it, but you can't teach them. So there's these sort of liminal skills in the middle, which probably look like that. And then there are some capabilities which are probably, I'm not comfortable quite with the word innate, except this idea that
You're talking about talent.
I guess I am. I guess that's what I'm talking about. But there are things like, let me see if like playfulness. Can playfulness be taught? And the love of play? Probably. I don't know where that level is. But absolutely the most important things that students can learn is the things that are least teachable.
Yeah, I could see that. And a lot of those are learned through experiences. That's why experiential learning is really important. I mean, the reason we push experiential learning, the try stuff out element of life design, is because it clarifies interests and values, but also it develops skills. And Bill Burnett, Dave, I, and all of us who subscribe to the life design philosophy believe that there is no such a thing as finding your passion. What we all believe is that you construct your passion with experiences. You first get curious, you go experiment with it, you get good at it. And then as you get good at it and you get positive reinforcement from the environment, and then you start to produce results, and it's that rewarding part of you leads you to being incredibly inspired, and you invest more time and resources into the task and activity and the work, and therefore you become passionate. You're not born passionate by this, so passionate about these things. Some maybe one would call God-given talents, like singers. I'm not sure if one could ever work so hard to develop their skill to become a singer that they become really good at it, or they're just born with an incredible voice that they just have the biology for it, that they're able to develop that skill further. I can see that. But for the most part, I really believe that most abilities and skills are learned and can be learned. I'm in the business of leadership development. I teach leadership classes, and that's one of the areas that I like to clarify always in my classes, is that there is no such a thing as a born, leader with leadership skills that are just innate. It's not in the genes. I don't believe in that. I don't think science has proven otherwise. So I think what we know is that if you follow a set of formulas and practices and leadership, and you get good at it, and you read a lot, and you have role models, and you have mentors, and you make mistakes, and you improve based on those mistakes, and you learn the lessons, you grow to become a good leader. You develop emotional intelligence. It's practice makes perfect type of thing. So that's just one example. So leadership is an important skill for us that we want our students to learn, for example, and we know that that's important in this future of work environment that we're heading into.
So I'm going to ask my closing questions. One of them is the question that I've asked a lot of people, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
It's a tricky question. What job do I hire my job to do for me? I think I want to say, just on a college campus, for a university environment, to highly prioritize the process of students exploring and experimenting and figuring out their life paths, and then connecting with those types of opportunities. What I mean by that is that in higher education, this area is typically not prioritized at all. It is usually a peripheral service that runs on a shoestring budget, that is still in some odd space that university leadership has never stepped foot into. And that is mentioned occasionally here and there. That does not have a seat at the executive table. And therefore, it is hard to integrate this really important work that relates to the return on investment. I mean, this is ultimately the outcome that these students and parents are paying for when they enroll in the university. And most of the time in higher education, it is not prioritized, and it's not there. I mean, fortunately, at Johns Hopkins, it is. But I think what I would hire my job to do for me is to properly position this area of life design as a critical element of the university experience with a seat at the executive table, with a direct connection and partnership with other entities of the university in order to ensure that students are successful, all students, regardless of who they are.
That's a very ambitious thing to do, which is that it's large systems change. And one of the things I'm most interested in is how large systems work and how they affect the experience of individuals within those systems. And so I think this is a shining example of large system transformation to create a different experience for the people who are there. And I wonder, metrics aside, do you get to see it in the eyes of your students?
I do when I'm on stage at commencement, and our president is shaking the hands of students as they walk through the commencement stage, and I don't know all of students who are going through that stage, but I recognize several of them, and they look at me and I look at them, and some of them they wave or they take the time to wave, and I could tell that we're making a difference. I especially do when I connect with them months later or sometimes years later. Yeah, as alumni, I've been at Hopkins now for only 5 years, but I've already been able have had the chance to see a couple of classes go through our life design journey and curriculum and work, and how appreciative they are of the impact that is had on them. We hosted an event at Bloomberg in New York City on Monday with Michael Bloomberg, who is one of our alumni at the university. And I got to see a couple of people there who I hadn't seen for a couple of years, who graduated just in the last few years. And they came in with hugs, and then they were telling me their life design story. And what's interesting is that they're using the life design language. They were like, you would not believe what I did. I mean, one of them said, like I was in New York City, but I made the decision to move back to Columbus and give up the big corporate job and go with something startup. It's really risky, but I'm really curious about it. And they're using the language intentionally. So I'm trying it out and I'm taking some risks and I think I can. And so they're really grateful. Plenty of anecdotes like that make a big difference.
Fantastic. What does your job cost you? If work is a product that you're buying, what does it cost you to buy that product?
For me personally, I think probably it costs some time away from the family because it does require some travel and just some time away. But I think it's negligible because, oh gosh, I'm going to answer the question for you, Dart, in a different way. I don't think it could cost me much because I am so fulfilled doing this work. I really am. I think it would cost me a lot if I didn't have this job. I'm just so fulfilled doing this work. I love it. And I think what makes a big difference is that I work in a university environment that gets it. I work for a president who not only gets it, but supports it, or a provost who gets it, who support it. We have partners in the dean's offices in our schools who are absolutely behind this idea. And we've hired a stellar team that absolutely gets it. So they make it all worth it. So the cost is just really negligible. I'm having the time of my life.
I've never actually heard it said that way, and I love it, which is it would cost me something to not have this job. That is really the highest praise. That's a fantastic praise for the role. How can people learn more about you and about what you're doing?
Well, I invite everybody to check out our website, imagine.jhu.edu. I have a Vision Chats series on YouTube and podcast also, just like you. In fact, I'd love to return the invitation and have you on my show in the near future, Dart, if you will.
I'd love to.
So it's called Vision Chats. You can find it on YouTube, and I'd love for people to log in or whatever you get your podcasts. And I invite people to just reach out via LinkedIn or Twitter. Those are the two platforms that I use a lot. If they have any questions, we put everything online because we have a sharing spirit here. We don't feel like we have to hide anything. We're happy to share it if it helps others. It also gives us an opportunity to learn a lot about what people are doing. So as I said, I frequently engage with schools and in consulting projects or in speaking engagements at conferences, and it gives me an opportunity to learn a lot in that process. So reach out, we'll do this together, and there are some things that we figured out and others we're trying to figure out, and we'll learn all together.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.